Good evening. I'm Eve, filling in for Hattie. On tonight's episode, road woes and post-match heartbreak combine to end CF Montreal's MLS season on decision day. Bev Priestman reveals her squad for the upcoming Canadian women's national team friendlies, and Christine Sinclair calls time on her epic national team career. All that and more on episode 152 of The Ball is Round. And once again, I am joined by my friend and co-host, Elias Gregoriadis. How are you on this rainy Sunday, Elias?
Well, the weather matches the mood.
Oh boy. Okay. Thematic. And just so our listeners know, Hattie should be back with us next weekend. I believe so anyway. Just as a quick heads up, we should be a dynamic trio next week. So here we are. And just before we get started, good evening. Thank you, Matthew. Good evening to you. So yeah, Elias, you and I recorded on Monday, actually, of this week. I'm going to call it last week all the same. And we were asked a question regarding our thoughts on how Montreal's decision day was going to go. I had a thought and you had a thought, and it turns out I should have gone out and bought a lottery ticket because, am I right? Yeah. Montreal has no luck.
Yeah, especially in the way that you were right. It's not only that the teams they needed to win or draw didn't. It's the way that it didn't happen. If you look at the Charlotte game and you look at all the chances that Miami missed, and you look at all the chances Nashville missed, and then the way that
deep in injury time. Yeah,
exactly. So it's just one of those where you're like, you know what? It was the unstoppable force of Montreal's terrible luck against the immovable object of every team in MLS fighting for a playoff spot and not wanting to win games. And the unstoppable force won. That's basically
fair enough.
So yeah, it was one was bound to give in, and Montreal's bad luck is just more powerful than anything in the world, apparently.
True that. So just, I guess, so our listeners are kind of aware, just as we do every year, we're going to do, of course, our deep dive post-mortem, kind of a player by player look on things. And of course, not just players. But we'll start that next week because obviously we have a final match of the MLS season to look back on for Montreal. And we have some other topics as well to discuss, of course. But just for anyone who's curious, we will do our big bad deep dive starting next Sunday. All righty. So let's dial it back. And we are showing up with the benefit of hindsight. So I feel like unfortunately our show is going to be a little bit tinged with that. But nonetheless, let's do as we always do and take a look at how Montreal approached its final match of the season on the road at Columbus, visiting none other, of course, than their ex, Wilfried Nancy. So let's take a look at the lineup that Hernan Losada presented for this final road match. And of course, road matches have not been Montreal's forte this season, to say the least. But obviously, going into this match, the easiest way for Montreal to guarantee themselves a spot in the playoffs would be to win. And, win, and you don't have to rely on anyone else's results. So one would think that was the mentality that Hernan Losada approached this match with. And here is the starting 11 that he put out. Jonathan Sirois in goal, Zachary Brault-Guillard on the right wing back position with Ariel Lester in the left wing back position, a defensive center back trio of Gabriela Corbo, Joel Waterman, and George Campbell, Samuel Piette as captain, Nathan Saliba as well in the midfield, Mahala Opoku and Sanusi Ibrahim, and Rumel Kyoto up top. So again, basically, essentially a 3-4-3. It worked for Montreal, of course, at home against Portland. But when you saw the starting 11, what did you think?
My first thought was, oh, they're going for it. They're not banking on other teams trying to giving them the benefit of the doubt. They're looking to go out there and get a win, or at least go blow for blow with Columbus, kind of in the way we saw when Columbus came to town. And granted, Montreal's finishing kind of deprived us of a straight shootout, but they were looking to play open, they were looking to play attacking, and I was like, okay, this is positive. It also kind of reinforced. I thought maybe the writing was on the wall that you were going to be right when Mathieu Choinière and Aaron Herrera both weren't in the starting lineup.
And Choinière was just completely absent.
Exactly. Who did I say?
No, you said Aaron Herrera.
Yeah, exactly. And Mathieu Choinière, just not in the lineup at all. Because apparently of a little knock he picked up with the Canadian camp. So yeah, it's obviously a very that was disappointing, but I was excited for the starting lineup. I thought that was the best 11 they could have possibly fielded. I didn't feel like there was anything left wanting in terms of, if they were going to play that style, that was probably the best 11 to do it right now. So
right on. Yeah, fair enough. And you kind of have a point, because Montreal did get off to a dream start in this match. In the 7th minute, actually, Nathan Saliba found ZBG, who had surged up that right wing, and Nathan Saliba played a ball into the 18-yard box, which ZBG was able to run onto. He did a very simple low cross across the box, and Columbus at that moment was very light at the back, and Sanusi Ibrahim was wide open on the far post for a very simple tap and finish. Montreal was able to take a 1-0 lead on the road, a feat they have accomplished very few times in the 2023 season. When that goal happened, Elias, did you believe? 7 minutes in.
Honestly, all I thought was, don't poke the bear. Because I was like, maybe did they do this a bit too early? And Columbus is gonna kind of come back with their full weight and full attacking pressure, and they're gonna have to kind of hold this lead or defend this lead for 80 minutes, which, with respect, I don't think anybody would think they could.
Well, Columbus is the most prolific attack in MLS this season.
And Montreal is the worst defense on the road. So it seemed to be...
It's kind of a match made in hell.
Exactly. It was kind of obviously I was thrilled because Montreal scoring, first of all, Montreal scoring on the road, incredible. Montreal scoring first on the road, insane. Montreal doing that against one of the best, if not the best, home team in the league, unthinkable. But that doubt starts to creep into your mind and go, oh no, was this too early? And it was. But it was a great 30 seconds of
ovulation
of like, ovulation, or of almost like, pinch me or something. And then
Well, I'm glad it seems Pessimistic Eve may be rubbing off on you a little bit as well then. Yay. And like you said, Elias, the worry was obviously that Columbus was kind of going to just go on an all-out assault of Montreal, and that's exactly what happened. Really, for the remainder of the match, if we're being completely transparent. I think perhaps that concession maybe woke up the hosts a little bit, because it was essentially a siege of Montreal's half of the pitch for huge portions of the match beyond that. In the 16th minute, we saw Cucho Hernandez, who, of course, we all, I'm sure, remember from his visit to Stade Saputo when he scored a hat trick the last time these two clubs met. In the 16th minute, he actually drifted right in between Gabriela Corbo and Joel Waterman, and a player was able to play a very floating cross over top of the defenders, which luckily for Montreal, he was not able to control at the time. That being said, were you nervous seeing Cucho Hernandez terrorizing Montreal's defense again?
Look, if he sticks around, which I don't think he will, given just how well he's playing. If he stays in MLS for an extended period of time,
Mhm.
I just think he's going to become one of those players that becomes like a just somebody that just loves to terrorize Montreal, right? If you look at the hat trick
Yeah.
he scored earlier this season, if you look at the way he played against Montreal last year, even if he didn't get the score, though, just the way he played, this goal, and again all the chances he had throughout the
Mhm.
game, if you just he's going to be one of those players that every time Montreal plays Columbus, he's going to find a way to make Montreal miserable. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, we talked about a warning shot. We talked about, Columbus coming back, and they came out right away. So it's kind of scary to see just how easily they could find all that space.
Mhm.
And definitely a sign of
And
things to come.
definitely a sign of things to come. I agree. We do have a comment from Chan who said bright
Yeah.
start yesterday. And yes, Chan, you are correct. Unfortunately, it was not to last. I've seen some other comments come in, but just kind of going to leave them for when the topic arises,
Yeah.
just as kind of an FYI to those of you who are listening along with us. So yes, like you said, Elias, a sign of things to come, because 1 minute later in the 17th minute, you know, there was a really interesting run of play, I think, from Columbus when the play was kind of switched from the left-hand side to deep along the right-hand side of their attacking, so Montreal's left-hand defensive side, which was received and then quickly laid off all along the 18-yard line for Cucho Hernandez, who was wide open and
Was
able to take a first-time shot. And the shot couldn't have been better placed. It pinged off the post and went in the net to tie the match. When I went back on the replay, there were no fewer than 8 Montreal players in the box, not including Jonathan Sirois. I don't think I counted him, actually. So technically 9 during this sequence, yet they were helpless to stop Columbus on this goal. What went wrong, Elias?
I think it's one of the things that you kind of concede when you play with two central
Mhm.
midfielders, is you are going to be relatively thin in the middle of the field. And when you are kind of in your defensive block, that protection that a six, that a designated six would kind of afford you,
Mhm.
is that player who lets other people worry about their own stuff and whose primary focus is the top of the area, where Cucho was kind of camping unmarked, right? You saw Saliba was busy with his own stuff. Samuel Piet tried to tackle the ball and missed, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden there was nobody at the top
Yeah.
of the area. And it kind of the first thing I thought of was this was a couple weeks ago, if not maybe a couple months ago. We talked about one thing that Montreal needs going forward, and it's a player that could just rip the paint off the ball and shoot from anywhere.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about how Montreal could break down low blocks and how, if you don't have anyone that could shoot from outside the area and always be dangerous, teams are going to be fine sitting deep against you. And Cucho Hernandez is that kind of player that, Montreal had 8 players inside the box. But it doesn't matter if you have someone who from 20 yards out can hit it off the post and in. And the second the ball was laid off, I kind of balled my fist a little bit and my jaw
Mhm.
clenched, and I was like, "Oh no!" And before you even hit it, because you could tell the second, it's that
Yeah.
aura that if Cucho
Right?
Hernandez has an angle to shoot, everybody goes, "Shit!" Right? I think all of Montreal just collectively went, "Shit!"
Yeah.
before the ball was in the net, and it's that kind of player that makes or breaks a game and opens up defenses the way he does so well.
Yeah. No, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think the way that Columbus set up this opportunity was really good in that they switched from one flank to the other, and so they kind of eliminated anybody in the midfield who could have intercepted that. But I agree with you that it's and that Montreal was light in coverage in that regard, and it seemed as though, at least just watching it from a distance, um, there were 8 players in the box. However, they weren't necessarily. It didn't appear that they were doing anything, for want of a better way to put it. It didn't
Yeah.
appear. It was a little bit chickens with your head cut off. There were a few players who were definitely caught ball watching. It didn't seem as though there was a recognition of whose job it was to intercept, which phase of play. And I think that one
I
goes
think
back
that's
on
what
the
Columbus
coach.
does so well. I think that's what
Yeah.
Columbus also does so well, is that they're so
Was
good going forward that other teams are just hesitant to step out of their shape and cover any potential threat they see, because they think, oh my God, if I step out of position, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
So the second
Yeah.
that there's a gap, they go, do I step into the gap or do I do my own job? Because Columbus is good enough that if I leave my post, then all of a sudden I could be the reason that we concede. So you could
For
tell
sure.
that everyone was kind of just like caught the second that the middle of the field opened up, and they were like, and then everyone kind
Yeah.
of short circuited a little bit. So I think that also kind of lends to just how intimidating Columbus's attack can be, that they inspire such fear in so many teams that they don't even want to react on instinct, that they have to kind of stay planted and live with the consequences.
No, and that's a really good point as well. And obviously, I mean, they have the stats as well to back up, that reputation. So yeah, that's a really good point too as well. I don't know. I mean, I'm not necessarily a proponent of it all the time, but I think a more conservative approach from Lozada would have probably benefited Montreal in this match, just knowing how prolific Columbus is and how much Montreal has struggled on the road this season. Especially knowing that even a point would have secured Montreal a place in the playoffs. It was just don't lose. A win would have been, eighth place for sure, but a point could have still gotten them a spot. I digress. So one thing I found a little bit interesting, and I just want to get your perspective and see if you kind of notice the same thing. So obviously Montreal did not have a lot of attacking opportunities in this match. In fact, I didn't really write down any other attacking opportunities for us to break down.
Yeah,
by all means, Elias, if you saw something of note, feel
nope.
free to interject.
Nope. You were correct. There were no.
Well, there was like a Nathan Saliba shot really, really late in the second half that went like just over the net, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, but otherwise it was pretty tame. I
Oh, I
digress
meant in
though.
the first half. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to my point here. So one thing I noticed in the first half was Romell Kyoto's body language quite a lot. And it kind of stuck out to me maybe for the first time or maybe the most in the 33rd minute when we saw Sam Piet pick up a yellow card. It was definitely a yellow card and everything like that. Like it was a poor tackle. But we saw Romell Kyoto getting up in the ref's face and getting really heated about it. And then I noticed as the match went on, some of the Columbus players were shoving him a little bit and they were kind of getting in his face and from what I could tell, trying to provoke a reaction. What did you make of his body language or his general kind of aura in this match? Because this may well have been his last match in Montreal. We truly don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame because it was a match that went so under the radar for him. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you can tell that Wilfried Nancy maybe provided a bit of a scouting report to whoever was on that right side of the back three
Mm-hmm.
that lined up, because they did a very good job in managing Kyoto the person, maybe not necessarily the player, right? But when all else fails, having a good handle on the player's psyche is
Mm-hmm.
always a good thing to do as a defender. And if your coach can provide a even greater insight into that, then you have an even bigger advantage. And something that I highlighted when Kyoto came back was his unwillingness to be complacent in a positive way, right? When
Mm-hmm.
something went wrong or something could have been done better, he was very vocal about it, but in a way that felt constructive, right? Again, I don't know exactly what he says. I'm on the field with him, but just his body language, right? This is what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. And the last, 2-3 games that he came back, you could tell that there was a certain uplifting quality about it because of the fact that it felt like he was motivating. And today or last night rather, it felt different. It felt like he was more out of frustration than a
Mm-hmm.
willingness to uplift, your teammates.
Yeah.
And that's, if that's from one of your leaders, your talisman, the person you rely on offense, and that's the way that he's going about it, then yeah, it's definitely gonna weigh on you, especially when you don't have as much of the ball and you don't have as
Yeah.
many opportunities. So that rare time that you do have any kind of position in the final third or in even in Columbus's half, and it goes wrong, and that's the reaction you get from the person who's supposed to lead you going forward, then yeah, obviously you're gonna take it to heart. So That was a little disappointing to see. And if
Yeah.
that's the way the Romel Kyoto era in Montreal ends, it will be disappointingly anticlimactic.
For sure. And probably a question that Hattie's going to bring up next week, if not some other week. Was that Romel Kyoto's last game with Montreal, in your opinion?
I think so.
Sorry, the moment just arose,
Hattie.
I know. I had to seize it, okay?
I think so.
I kind of
look,
agree,
we talked about the possibility of him, the hypothetical last week of him coming back on a reduced salary and stuff like that for 1 year, like a last dance type of thing. But
I don't know. You can only win that bet so many times. I feel like Olivier Renard,
exactly.
he
Like it
let
happened with
Camacho walk.
It happened with Wanyama.
He let Wanyama
exactly.
walk. Exactly.
Technically, let Corbo walk and he came back.
Sort of, yeah.
Or I don't know. We still don't know the whole.
That was a loan, so it was bound to end. But yeah, it was random.
It was very mercurial. But yes. I think with Kyoto, it's the end of the road, so it's very unfortunate because, besides Patrice Bernier and Nacho Piatti, this is arguably the greatest impact / CF Montreal
Marco
player of the MLS era. You include Marco. I think that Kyoto was around longer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Just barely. So I think maybe he had a bit. I think in terms of moments, Marco Di Vaio is definitely up there. But I think if you look at the Mount Rushmore, it's those four, and all the three others got a much more appropriate send off, if you will.
Yeah.
In terms of their last moments, the last games, time with the club, and Kyoto's is a little more unceremonious, which is very sad given how he was so unabashedly in love with the city, and the love was returned from the fans. So I hope it doesn't end like this, right? Everyone's allowed to hope, but I don't think that we'll see him next year, which sucks.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All around. I do. But we'll see, obviously, in the immortal words of our co-host. Let's wait and see. Because of course the off season now begins for Montreal, and Olivier Renard and Vasily Cremanzidis and all those folks are about to get very, very busy.
Very unpredictable.
So returning back to the game, Montreal went into the half clinging to their 1-1 scoreline. And at that moment, in the 45th minute, they were in 9th place because by that point, Charlotte had taken the lead against Miami. But the other results were still keeping the opposition out of the playoff places. So it was pretty clear that Columbus was, dominating proceedings completely, but there was really we didn't see any change at halftime. Like, we didn't see any personnel change. We didn't see any formation change. Were you surprised at all by that, Elias? I'm not going to ask you, what would you have done? Because we've beat that question to death, I think. But were you surprised not to see any changes?
Not surprised to see any changes. I think maybe if he had made a like-for-like substitutions in terms of just fresh legs, maybe. Especially with someone like Samuel Piette, who again was admittedly jet lagged. But besides that, I wasn't too surprised that there was no changes. Like Montreal, I don't think Montreal was going into the game expecting a dominant possession. I think they were expecting to suffer and defend a lot and hope to hit back on the counter, which is what they did. They won possession and they hit back right away on the Sanusi goal. And I think that they kind of wanted to stick with that, which is understandable. I mean, it's
a fair road tactic.
Exactly. And it's the tactic that basically everybody uses on the road in MLS, right? Very few people go into an opposing stadium and dominate possession, especially if it's if it's not against a bottom feeder team. So, which Columbus is obviously not. So I think that I wasn't too surprised to see that there wasn't any kind of change.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, well then I'm going to ask you the same question again in just a few minutes. Because for the final time, match 34 of 34 for Montreal, we saw a tough start to the second half, just kind of like a nice book ending, if you will, from the start of the season in its own horrible way. So in the 50th minute, Columbus built swiftly, kind of from the halfway line. It was a series of really quick passes played along Montreal's defensive right-hand side of the pitch, and saw them enter, of course, the Montreal 18-yard box. Player Edmondson laid the ball back to Darlington Nagbe, who once again had drifted right to the very top of the 18-yard box. He was in that little half circle, and he was open and ready. He had the time to take a quick touch to settle the ball, and he caught Sirois wrong-footed, and the home side took the lead with a 2-1 scoreline. This goal, there's a degree of similarity in whereabouts the shot came from, which, as we discussed earlier. But this goal, I mean, Columbus, like the way that they strung together their passes along that right-hand side for Montreal, it was just like so quick. It almost reminded me a little bit of Japan versus Canada, one of their goals from our match last week. I forget. It was maybe their third goal. I forget. Yeah, I think maybe their third goal, the not own goal one. Anyway, I digress. But it was just the way that they strung together their passes so quickly. It was really something like we haven't seen a lot from Montreal. We've seen, a lot of hesitancy. And when you look at like the passing map for yesterday's match, the two players who passed the most to each other were Corbo and Waterman. And Snoozy was kind of on an island by himself. So what did you make of this goal, Elias? We saw, Sirois wrong-footed. Was that a matter of him just being screened by their bodies, or what was up?
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that he reacted late. It was a nice shot, but it wasn't exactly like, pinpoint perfectly into the bottom corner, and there was nothing Sirois could have done. I think that he maybe just wasn't set for it, right? And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
He stepped up and then tried to set himself, and he just didn't get out in time. But again, this was another case of if you have two players in the as central midfielders, you are sacrificing the six whose only job is to worry about the top of the penalty area. And lo and behold, the only other goal again was a free shot from the top of the penalty area. Right, Nathan Saliba and Saint-Piet both got drawn in, and that easy layoff, that release pressure, and then all of a sudden, they turn and see wide open Nagbe, and it's a free shot, and that's something that as a six whose sole job is to worry about the top of the penalty area, that shot doesn't happen. So, yeah, in hindsight, it sucks, but I still wouldn't. With hindsight, I wouldn't have changed anything about how Montreal lined up, and with the players available, and the way that Losada wanted to play. It's perfectly understandable. It's just one of those situations where you live with it, and you die with it.
Fair enough. Now I will ask you, seeing Montreal go down 2-1 on now, obviously that means, if they were to lose the match, I'm sure everybody on that team knew this going into it. If they were to lose the match, they would not be masters of their own destiny. Were you surprised that it took until the 67th minute for Montreal to make a sub or virtually any type of change?
Yeah, that I was a bit surprised by. I assumed that after the goal, Losada would want to see how the group reacts. I would have thought like maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, but I didn't think it would take almost 20 minutes for Jonathan Vincent to come on. I thought that the second he scored, he was going to be sent to warm up as kind of a message to the forward saying, pitter patter, or else
get in the game.
Out.
Yeah,
exactly. But I was definitely surprised that it took him that long, and then after Vincent, it took another 15 minutes to get the rest of the everything but the kitchen sink portion of the substitutions. So yeah, that was one thing that I wish had happened maybe a bit earlier. Again, we're not in the mind of Losada. I understand why he didn't substitute immediately after the goal.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree with you.
15,
it would have been
20
super
minutes.
reaction.
Yeah, 15-20 minutes may have been a tad long, especially knowing how much quality Jonathan Vincent brings, and that willingness to kind of, if I have to do it myself, I'll do it myself, that he brings to the team, that was very clearly missing with Kyoto kind of marked out of the game. and Opoku more or less neutralized. And like you said, Sanusi on an island by himself. So yeah, I wish that, maybe even 10 minutes more of Shanatari saying, who knows?
Who knows? Exactly. Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And, even after Columbus took a lead, they continued their assault on Montreal. They continued to look to, I think, pad their lead. They certainly weren't sitting back and resting on that one goal lead by any stretch. So I was really surprised that whether it was bringing in another midfielder and switching formation to something that would give guys like Nathan Saliba a little bit more breathing room to maybe contribute more to the attacking phase of play. Whatever it might have been. And I know Montreal's a little bit light in the midfield, maybe even bringing in Bryce Duke and giving him a shot because he didn't come in, of course, until the 80th minute. I was really, really, really surprised to see no change whatsoever. Especially, like you said, Opoku had been really heavily marked. And for Kyoto, I kept worrying most of the game. I was like, oh, goodness, he's gonna have a moment or something. And Montreal's going to find themselves down to 10. So, I just didn't feel like it was coming off on his end either. So I was really surprised. And we've talked a lot about Lozada's substitutions for better and for worse this season. And for me, this is one where he didn't really get it right. For me, it was kind of too late by the time he started making substitutions. So I'm going to be honest, I pretty much wrote out the remainder of the match in 2 sentences. So I'm just going to read it out. So overall, the remainder of the match saw kind of a general dominance from the home side. If you look at, the possession, if you look at the heat map, if you look at any of that, any of the stats, it was Columbus that dominated Montreal wholeheartedly. Montreal's, only chance of real note in the second half came off a free kick when Nathan Saliba shot the ball just over the crossbar. I think that was around the 87th minute, if I'm not mistaken. And, thanks really to heroics by Joel Waterman, who wound up wearing the captain's band by the end of the match. He literally threw his body on the line multiple times during that, and some saves as well from Josie Roy. The match ended 2-1, and as the final whistle blew, Montreal was in 9th place in that final play-in spot, heading on the road to Charlotte. So before we talk about what happened just a couple of minutes later, what was your overall sentiment from the match? For me, like if Montreal had continued on into the playoffs, I don't think they would have made it past the first round. For me, their form going into this was terrible. Like they had one win in 8 matches?
Something like that.
I think it's 8 matches with the Columbus game included. 1 win in 8 is not good. And historically speaking, teams that go into playoffs hot tend to do better. And looking at Charlotte, for example, they picked up 4 points in 2 weeks against Miami. Like, yeah, they have a really, really bad record for dropping points. Going from a winning position to kind of having to settle for a tie. But, being able to say that they kept Leo Messi off the score sheet is, I think, something that the team would look to build on for sure. So overall, though, what was your sentiment on this match before the events of a couple of minutes later?
In a vacuum, that was, this says a lot about the season, but that was arguably one of their better away games, which says a lot about
kind of,
about the way the team, right? Because even then, the reaction, especially of late, to conceding that second goal would be to concede even more goals.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that was not for lack of trying, because they did allow a lot of really good chances, but they didn't concede, and they did get some time in possession and in advanced areas. Granted, like you said, there wasn't much in terms of quantifiable scoring opportunities, but if we're going off the way that they've played on the road this season, as bad as they've been, this was one of the better games. And again, that's just an indictment. That's more an indictment of how bad they've been on the road than a credit to this game. But
Yeah.
that was my first thought because again, I am ever the optimist. But I genuinely thought that, the way, because again, the Nashville, if anybody had followed along with the
Mhm.
Nashville Red Bulls game, it was a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
There was like 8 minutes of added time after the first half. Every time I would look over from the Montreal game, somebody was on the floor. Somebody was in pain. It was just an absolute mess, and it was one of those games custom made for a 0-0 draw.
Yeah.
And I just, it was one of those. It's a classic, both teams really being the best version of themselves. And so I just thought, you know what? There's no way any team scores this because there's just too many shenanigans for any kind of momentum to be generated.
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
mean, I felt like I was right up until the final shenanigan, which was a season-ending
Exactly.
shenanigan for Montreal. But
Exactly.
yeah, I
So
think overall my takeaway from the game, when 90 minutes blew, when full time blew in
mhm.
Montreal, I was like, that sucked, but that
I was
wasn't as
honestly
sucky as
just
other games.
I was just kind of glad that like Montreal had kind of like there was always going to be all this hullabaloo around the matches against the Columbus Crew this year because of Wilfred
Mhm,
Nancy, obviously. Like Rudy Camacho to some degree, but particularly Nancy. And so a huge part of me, expected nothing going into this match for Montreal. But I was just kind of like, okay, it's over. It's kind of like when you date somebody and you break up with them, but like you still kind of run in the same social circle and you have to see them.
mhm,
And it's super awkward and uncomfortable for a little while. But eventually it gets a little easier. It's kind of like that is how I envisioned it. Um, so it was I was just kind of like, okay, like that band-aid's been pulled off. It's over. Like they've gotten their first round of playing each other over. Um, and so hopefully some more moving on can start to happen on both sides. But as you alluded to, Elias, just a few minutes after the final whistle blew in that Montreal Columbus match, Nashville and New York Red Bulls saw it, something come to life, I guess, for one of a better way to. I actually got a text message about it from Wes in Nashville. He texted me and he said, Red Bulls just got a penalty, and he was like, "It's a good call," and I was like, "Oh crap!" And that's how I learned about it because I'd actually like walked away and I was going to go get a drink or something, um, and I was like, I can't watch this, and I actually didn't watch it, but I was told by a source on the ground that it was a good call,
it
for the
was, it
penalty.
was.
Yeah. Okay. So
'Cause
the
I
Red
was I
Bulls
was
have.
actually I was covering the Habs game, so I
Oh
had
yeah.
all these games open on my
Oh
laptop. By
god.
the way, Apple TV, please, like, they introduced it for the Apple TV, the little box, but please introduce, like, multi-viewer to watch multiple games at once, uh, because you can't do that on a laptop, which is very annoying.
Oh,
But,
that is tedious.
so please, I'd like to watch multiple games, especially when you have all the games happening at the same time. Please and thank you. But,
They do have, like, the weird whip around show, but I think I know what you mean, more like,
yeah, like, I wanna be able to
designate the
watch
the games,
multiple
yeah.
windows. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So I had to use a much more nefarious stream to find it to kinda watch the other games.
all good.
Uh,
Things
and
happen.
it was terrible quality, but I saw somebody, it was like 480p, and I saw somebody fall in the box, and then I see, like, the pixelated arm of the ref point to the spot, and this is all muted, and I was just like I was in the press box
Yeah.
with my head in my hands, and just going, "Oh, no,
Oh,
not like
lord.
this." Not like this, but yes, it's,
But yes. So, for anyone who is out of the loop, in case you didn't pick up on the context from that conversation we just had, New York Red Bulls did indeed convert their penalty deep in injury time against Nashville. That saw them supplant Montreal to claim the final playoff or play in, however you choose to view it, spot, leaving Montreal finishing the season in 10th place. So, we have a question from Tate, and I feel like now is the opportune moment to ask it. And then we do have a couple of questions that snuck in our comments here as well, which we'll definitely get to. So Tate asks us, Did last night's decision day outcome hurt more than 2021? And just to refresh the memory of anyone listening who maybe has joined the podcast or following Montreal a little bit later, in 2021, Montreal was also eliminated from playoff contention on decision day. That was a home match against Orlando, where they lost 2-0 to Orlando. And Montreal, I think, went from being in 5th position to ending the day in 10th position. So very similar, well, semi-similar to last night's events. So, Elias, I'll let you go first.
I think that this one hurt more because of how last minute it was.
Mm-hmm.
That entire game against Orlando 2 years ago was a mess, right? With was it Camacho or Kyoto who got sent off?
Camacho.
I think it was Camacho, right?
It was.
Camacho got sent off. They conceded early. It was just a complete and utter disaster of a game.
Yeah.
I think on paper that definitely hurts more because you dropped that many positions out of the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at how Montreal were eliminated this year on a last minute penalty,
yeah,
Nashville at home, who's usually so responsible and so unlikely to drop points at home, or even lose at home, right? If they had drawn and dropped points, it's fine, but to lose at home is such a rarity for Nashville.
Yeah.
For it to happen the way it did, just screams Montreal. And like you said, right? You can't have any bit of luck or any kind of good fortune, God forbid.
Not this year. No.
So, yeah, I think this one definitely hurt a lot more just because of the way it happened. But on paper, dropping all those positions on decision day 2 years ago, 2 years ago, is terrible.
Yeah, and I mean, at home, obviously, 2 years ago as well is never fun. And as well, 2021 was just a rough year for Montreal fans all around.
Yeah. That is true.
Yeah, that being said, I do agree with you for sure. And I also think like in 2021, it was really you could still take away a lot of positives. You could still see a lot of progress. You could see like you even felt that there was a degree of ambition with the way that the team had recruited players like Georgi Mihailovic, for example, like Kamal Miller that year. And so you felt that yes, while they were building a young base, it was like a really young base that was, on the cusp of reaching that next level. And this year, and so like even though they got eliminated, it made you kind of look forward to 2022. Whereas I think this year there's just so much more uncertainty. Leading up into the playoffs, like I don't know if you saw at end of last week, Olivier Renard did an interview on the radio where he straight up said he wasn't satisfied with their season. There are several players who have been alienated completely by Lozada, or at least who don't have a very good relationship with Lozada. I mean, when a player the caliber of Victor Wanyama is not in, doesn't get along with the coach, that's not a good sign. So I think there's just so much more uncertainty as well. So looking like now that we're going to start looking forward to next year, it's kind of with like an air of, I don't know. it's an air of confusion, nervousness, definitely not really feeling that stability that we were feeling, I think, going from 2021 to 2022. So I think it just leaves us with like a lot more questions and just bad vibes.
Yeah, I think also the fact that the players brought in while young, 2 years ago, 3 years ago they were young, but they were not as young and they were much more finished projects. Really, Georgi Mihailovic was still he was like 24.
But he'd been capped by the United States by that point.
Exactly. Kamal Miller was, significantly older than right, like some of the 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds that had been brought in, right? So I think the reason that there was so much more optimism was because there was something quantifiable to kind of latch your hopes onto. Here, this team has a lot of upside, but the thing is, can the club as it is right now bring out that upside? Which is a very different question. Now, I'd love to see Georgie was 22 at the time of the trade.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Georgie at 22 was already capped by the United States, right? So
and it was like one cap,
yeah, he was,
still.
but he was called up. Exactly. So Patrick also had, he'd already played 4 MLS seasons. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's just
a much more finished product and a much more comfortable with MLS product. So yeah. I'd love to see, some players kind of reach their ceiling a bit more, because there is a lot of potential in some of these players, but maybe not in the current, system. The one thing that would give me the most hope before the season starts next year would be a formation change. I think that, keeping the 3 back was just a comfort thing.
Yeah.
But I think that they need to go to a 4 back, especially if they want to play the way they do.
Because and now that they don't have Rudy Camacho.
Exactly. So if you're playing 3 back, you are sacrificing either the midfield or the attack. And if you're someone that wants to play this run and gun, gung ho, very quick, and breaking lines, you can do it with 5 players assigned to defense. Even if you have wingbacks, their responsibilities to defend, you can't do that with 5 players, with half your outfielders assigned to defensive roles. So I think that, especially with Aaron Herrera is a quality fullback, Zachary Brugger is a quality fullback, but Ariel Laster is a winger. And he's shown it a number of times that he is better as a winger than he is as a wingback. And he's not necessarily in the right spot at times. So, yeah, the one thing that would make me, that would give me real excitement next year, but again, besides signings and stuff like that, the one tactical thing that would give me real excitement is a change to 4 back. I would love that, because they have all the pieces.
Except a left back and possibly a striker.
I mean, there's a lot of players that can play that. And again, if you have one striker, you have someone like Jonathan Vissaint, and you have a lot of people that are
that a striker, like a reliable striker.
A reliable striker if there's no Romell Quioto. And then obviously, as we said ad nauseum, a left back. Please, for the love of God.
Yes. Left back. For the love of God. Exactly. So we've had at least one question come in. So I'm going to, I think now is probably the best time to bring it up, but do you have anything else to say on the events of last night before we move on?
I've said all.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. All right, then we have a question from Patrick White, who says, so when do the Bobby Smirniotis rumors start again? So I think Patrick has clearly, taken a stance on the Lozada status. Last I had heard, Bobby Smirniotis was a candidate for the national team.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't necessarily see rumors with him being associated with Montreal, but I do definitely see rumors with other coaches being associated with Montreal. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I've said it from the beginning of the year. I think that they would have had to have an absolutely objectively disastrous Toronto grade season for Lozada to be on the hot seat. And he was at the beginning of the year, because they were having a terrible, horrible Toronto grade season at the beginning of the year. But since then, look, the fact that, every single thing that could have gone wrong for a new coach did. Right?
Yeah.
Your players were not comfortable with the change in tactics, injuries, off-field shenanigans. Any possible thing that could have gone wrong did for a new coach. So I think that the fact that he weathered the storm more often than not does give him the benefit of the doubt and has earned him an extra year. I do think that the playoffs are the bare minimum for him next year, and if they miss the playoffs again, then there's no reason for him to stick around. But I think he's done more than enough to earn a second look. Again, now this is from the outside looking in, right? We've heard all these reports, we've heard all these rumors about the dressing room being unsettled. A lot of these people being unsettled. Well, I mean, the biggest one right now is Victor Wanyama, because 2 other people that were relatively unsettled were Rudy Camacho and Kamal Miller. One was traded, and one already wasn't renewing his contract, so they kind of
Sean Rea disappeared into the ether.
Yeah, exactly. So again, maybe Sean Rea will hope to maybe work in the off season and regain, some kind of trusted relationship with
Yeah.
Losada. But I think that with the product that's been put on the field and with the results they've had, I think that he's earned a second season.
Interesting.
I think that we've seen the ceiling that Losada Ball. We've talked about Losada Ball. We've seen the ceiling it can
Yep.
reach with some of their better games. Now he has a full off season to kind of tweak and think and tinker and kind of mold the team more to his liking, both in terms of signings and
Mm-hmm.
also player management and off season player development. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'm gonna say it again. I think he's done enough, but next year is uh his
Kind of
last
do or
chance,
die.
obviously.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The playoffs are nothing.
Yeah. So Patrick gave his comment, and then I'll kind of give my 2 cents. So Renard said a couple of times he didn't like the style of play, alienating players, some of the speaking out in the media. I don't see how he can stay. And then he also, Elias, I'll direct this one to you. Can you tell me what the style is? I see very ugly football.
Oh, on the road, I agree with you.
On the road, it's
It's been
heinous.
very ugly. It's borderline unwatchable on the road.
Yeah.
I think that even the team will agree with you that on the road is some kind of horrible monstrosity of a mutation of Losada Ball. But at home we've seen it a number of times, right, where they love to exploit the spaces. This is a very quick team, right? You look at that starting 11, there's a lot of players with a lot of pace, especially going forward. So they love to use the pace to exploit those spaces in behind, and they love to use it to get into the open field. And once they do break those lines against the open field, they kind of attack you and they kind of get after you without you having the chance to adapt. We saw it clear as day against games like Minnesota and games like Portland. So there is a clear vision for how Hernan Losada wants to play, and we've seen how good it can be.
Mm-hmm.
The trick now is, can we get it for more than 2 or 3 games a year? That is the thing, right? Because there was a bunch of
2
other
or 3
games
out
that
of
were
20
one
or
nothing,
out of 34 rather. Oh boy.
right? There was a bunch of other
Mm-hmm.
games that we saw that were 1-0 wins that were you know they were great for half an hour and then kind of put on cruise control and then just saw the game out, right? Those games
Mm-hmm.
against teams like Nashville, teams like New England, games like that, games against Cincinnati, where these are not scrubs, right? These are some of the best teams in the league. And for that half hour where they were running and gunning, they were untouchable until they
Mm-hmm.
kind of realized that maybe they can't do this for a full 90 and then got into defensive shape. So we've seen instances where this is, first of all, very nice, because just because they don't have 65% possession like we've now sees tactics and passing the ball to death, and then the team kind of just falls apart, the defense kind of just falls apart and you waltz in and score, does not mean it's ugly football, right? The way that they do it is it's accelerated and it's a different kind of appreciation. The thing now is it has to be done reliably and consistently, and that is the
Mm-hmm.
biggest if for this season.
Yeah. For me, I feel like, I think if the coach is losing the faith of multiple players, notably players in leadership positions within the team, I don't see how Montreal can justify keeping them, honestly. We've seen what it's like when they have had coaches who haven't had the backing of the players in the past. And it's not ended well. And so for me, honestly, this is kind of like the most opportune moment rather than waiting to see if those fences can be mended. So that honestly is my main takeaway. You're already asking a lot of your players here in Montreal. You're asking them, you know, you're asking them to basically give you the most bang for your buck that you can get, kind of, as a sporting director. I feel like you have to give them a coach who can relate to them and who can treat them in the way that they I guess want to be treated as players and as humans.
Yeah,
So
I
that,
agree with you. I think that if they
yeah.
are going to move on, you're right. They have to do it now because you saw what happened last year when they kind of brought Losada in the new year, basically. And he had 2 months to kind of get ready before the season started. So yeah, I 100% agree with you that if that is the way it's going to go, get it in the next month,
Yeah. Make up your mind. Kind of, not exactly the way it went with Phil Finanzi, and don't let it drag out like that. Exactly. I don't know. The club, I don't think, has announced when they're going to do their, press availability, their postmortem conferences.
It's going to be early next week. So my guess is Tuesday. My best guess is Tuesday.
Okay. And I hope you'll be there. No pressure.
I will absolutely be there. I am
perfect
there for sure.
All right. Because if that's the case, then obviously it's going to be a talking point for us next week. And maybe it's going to give us some clarity on the coaching situation. But we will probably talk that point to death over the course of the next several weeks, one way or the other. So if you're ready to move on, I'm also ready to move on to our next topic.
Let's do it.
All right. So, obviously, even though Montreal has finished playing, Stade Saputo does still have at least one more soccer game in it this season because the women's national team will be visiting Montreal next Saturday, so the 28th of October, hosting Brazil. And Bev Priestman has revealed her squad for that friendly match. They're also, of course, playing another match in Halifax on the 31st. So let's take a look at the squad because it's an interesting squad and I'm rather enthused by it. So for goalkeepers, we have Melissa Dagenet, Sabrina D'Angelo, Lisiane Prou, Kaylin Sheridan. For defenders, we have Kadisha Buchanan, Gabrielle Carl, Sydney Collins, Vanessa Gilles, Ashley Lawrence, Jade Riviere, Jade Rose, Bianca Saint-Georges, Shalina Zadorsky, and in the midfield, we have Marie-Yasmine Alidou, Jessie Fleming, Julia Grosso, Quinn, and Emma Regan. In the attack, we have Jordan Heitema, Chloe Lacasse, Adriana Leon, Nichelle Prince, Diane Rose, Christine Sinclair, Olivia Smith, and Eveline Vien. What do you make of the squad? I have lots of thoughts, so you go first.
My biggest thought, not just this squad, but the last few squads, is I really want this team to become an offensive juggernaut. And I really want Bev Priestman to kind of just say, our back line we have some very talented defenders. We have very solid defenders and a great goalkeeper to boot. I want her to start kind of just throwing attackers forward and kind of just ramming the team's offensive talent down the throat of, opponents. I'd love to see her line up with more than 2 proper forwards. I'd love to see her line up with 3, maybe even 4, and kind of just really exploit just how much firepower, especially given the form of some of these players right now. I think a game like these 2 against Brazil is a perfect opportunity to kind of try that, especially if you want to give the home fans a bit of a show. We saw the 2 wins against Jamaica. We saw the 2 games against Jamaica as very composed and very organized wins, where they kind of got in there, they got the result, they did what they needed to do, and they got out, which is, exactly what you want to see after how that World Cup went. But I really want to see just how offensive-minded this team can get, especially when you have people like Vien and Lacasse just lighting it up in Europe. And I'd love to see Bev Priestman kind of flex her attacking muscles and really let this team just go for it. So I think that, having a squad like this, having this much offensive firepower, this much pace, and this much technical quality at the front will allow you to do just that. So I would really love to see her maybe not be as conservative, maybe not be as cautionary, especially given that these are not competitive matches. So I understand the approach against Jamaica, where you have to take care of certain threats, and you have to also, you have to make yourself ready for any kind of scenario. But given that these are friendlies in front of your home crowd, I'd love to see her just go guns blazing into both games.
Excellent. So we have a comment from Matthew here who says Melissa Dagenet invited is a good gesture from the Canadian women's national team. Agree. Obviously, don't really know very much about her. She is Quebecoise, which is wonderful. And we actually have 6 Quebecoise players on this roster, which is a pretty Quebec heavy representation compared to, the past several years for Canada Soccer and for Bev Priestman squads. So it's really nice to see, especially given that they're going to be playing in Montreal. And just for context, Melissa Dagenet, she currently plays college soccer. So she plays with the University of Miami, and, she's only 22, so she certainly still has lots of soccer in front of her. However, Lisiane Proulx has now started playing pro. She's playing in Melbourne, and she actually played today, got a shutout. So be really interesting to see because, Kaylin Sheridan is definitely the number one. I think Sabrina D'Angelo has pretty much established herself as the backup, but there's definitely that third goalkeeper position, and you have 2 young up-and-coming goalkeepers who are going to have to fight it out, and hopefully they'll get the opportunity to show Bev Priestman what they can do in a match scenario, and why not in Quebec? Both of the players are from Quebec, Lisiane Proulx and Melissa Dagenet. Why not give them the opportunity to demonstrate what they can do at home?
Absolutely.
But we'll see. That being said, you did miss one player in your list, Elias, of players who are just balling out, and that is Marie-Yasmine Alidou. She has got 10 goals so far this season for Benfica in all competitions. That is like off the charts. She's kind of just picking up where Chloe Lacasse left off, and she's a midfielder. She's not a striker. So I think it would be really exciting as well to see her get a look in, because she is absolutely performing for her club like phenomenally, just being utterly dominant. So I do hope that she gets a look in as well. I understand, of course, that you have Jessie Fleming and Julia Grosso, who are so class, and of course Quinn just plays a completely different position. But yeah, I'd be really, really curious, and really would be excited to see what she can do, given the phenomenal run of form that she's currently in. And, in that midfield as well, we have Emma Regan. I actually had to double check. She has been capped before. She plays her pro soccer in Denmark, but she got 1 cap back in 2018 in the CONCACAF Women's Championship. Yeah. So she's kind of coming full circle. And even though she got that cap back in 2018, feels like a long time ago, she was only 18 years old at the time herself, because she's only 23 right now. That's so great. She is somebody who could still join, certainly, and, have a role to play in future competitions for Canada Soccer. So anyway, overall, I like the squad. I think that there is definitely more youth in the squad. Obviously we have a few players who have retired. We have some as well who are not present. For example, Alicia Chapman, she hasn't officially announced her retirement, but she is pregnant right now, so she's obviously not going to be playing. So it gives the opportunity for other players who are up and coming to slot in and demonstrate, that the future is now for Bev Priestman. So really interesting. I'm going to be really, really, really excited to see what Bev Priestman puts out for her starting 11 next week at Stade Saputo. I can't wait. And obviously, we haven't talked about it, but I feel like now's the time.
Just one thing real quick. Apparently, Bev Priestman did say that Alicia Chapman is pushing to be ready for the Olympics, which would be very cool. So that's one thing that she did say. So that would be very awesome if she was ready in time for that.
For sure, for sure. I think she's not necessarily like the most glamorous fullback, necessarily. And obviously it's hard because when you have Ashley Lawrence, if she's playing right fullback, it's like unfair to try and compare other players to her.
Yeah.
But she has definitely been a stalwart presence for Canada Soccer, for the women's national team through all their ups and downs. And she's been a huge part of all of their successes. So I agree that, knowing some of the veteran presence that we've lost and that we're going to lose on this women's national team, that I don't think it would hurt to have her around for the Olympics if she's up for it. Anything else you want to say before I talk about the thing I made it all the way through the roster without talking about?
I tried so hard not to mention it, but yeah, I think we're ready to
All
address the
right,
elephant in the room.
for sure. So obviously, Christine Sinclair is part of this 23-player roster called up by Bev Priestman. And when Bev Priestman was discussing with the press, the selection, the eternal question of Christine Sinclair's role came around, and Bev Priestman did everything she could not to answer that question, basically. And the reason was made pretty clear on Friday when Christine Sinclair posted an open letter to herself on Instagram announcing her retirement from international football at the end of 2023. So before we deep dive, I figure it's worth taking a look at the letter because it says a lot. There's a lot to take away from it. So I actually have it here so I can read it, and it's not too long. So it starts, "Dear Christine, you're 16 years old and things are about to change quickly. A little tired from your first flight overseas, you're eager to head up to your hotel room. It's still completely crazy to you that only a year ago you were sitting in the stands in Portland for the 1999 Women's World Cup, watching stars like Michelle Akers and Mia Hamm take to the field. In a few moments, you'll take an elevator ride with them. Please don't be too awkward. You're a national team player now. You're exactly where you belong. Trust yourself. I know it's all very overwhelming, and you are here to don the red and white for the first time at the 2000 Algarve Cup in Portugal. And coach Evan Pellerud says you are starting. You go on to finish the tournament with 3 goals. This, goal scoring, will become the signature for the rest of your playing career. From here on out, the game will change so much. Early on, it will just be about putting the ball in the back of the net, just like it always was when you started out all of those years ago. A 4-year-old on a team with a bunch of 6-year-olds, the Burnaby Bees. There was some crying, but mostly innocent fun playing football with some friends, or your brother and his friends, because they always let you join." Reading this, what more could there be, you'll ask? If I will become the most prolific goal scorer of all time and win an Olympic gold medal, then things must have gone smoothly, right? Well, pretty soon you'll discover things aren't so rosy behind the scenes. You'll learn the Canadian women's national team players were playing for $10 a day. You'll hear the prize money for the Women's World Cup is going to increase, only for the men's prize money to increase by more, widening the pay gap. You'll witness girls slip through the developmental cracks because of the lack of legitimate pathway to the national team. This is when you decide to fight back. Well, people will know you for your accomplishments on the pitch. They will remember you for how you transcended the painted white lines. Creating equity is what you will be most proud of. You'll stand up to your federation to push forward on a landmark equal pay agreement for the national team. You will help announce that a domestic professional women's football league is coming to Canada. You will inspire generations of young girls to kick a soccer ball for the first time with real dreams of playing professionally. And you better believe we will continue to fight for what's right, for equality for past, present, and future generations. Take pictures and explore. Soak in some of the most amazing places this planet has to offer. It's okay to take in those moments. Cherish the times with your teammates. Some of them will become your best friends, and you will get through the highs and lows together. When your parents get sick, know it is all right to step away to spend time with them. You'll never get that time back, and it is one of the best decisions you will ever make. But no matter what happens, don't change. Your work ethic, your desire to be better, and your mentality of never being satisfied are what set you apart. I'm writing to you 23 years, 6 World Cups, 4 Olympic Games, 327 caps, and 190 international goals later. That same kid from Burnaby, BC, with Major League Baseball dreams who instead got to travel the world kicking a ball around, all while proudly representing the country she loves. Speaking of that, maybe the maple leaf tattoo won't be the best idea. So here's a little advice for the journey ahead. Enjoy the ride. It's better than you could have dreamed of. So that was how Christine Sinclair announced her international retirement. Again, she is still active with the national team until the end of 2023. Elias, how did you feel when this announcement came out? Like for me, I was like, oh my God, it's happened. It's happened. I was at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Freaking out.
It's one of those where like, it's inevitable and that it's like way sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
but you just never actually think it's gonna get there. You just think she's gonna play until she's 50.
Yeah.
And I kind of I saw I was just scrolling on Instagram and then I saw it and then I kind of, when you're mindlessly scrolling, then you kind of do a double take, like, wait a
Yeah.
minute. And then I started reading the first, the first little picture
Yeah.
of the scroll that she posted, and I was like, oh no, I know where this is going. And yeah, it was a tearjerker the first time I read it. I read it like 3 or 4 times because I kind of just like
Mm,
reread it a bunch of times.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah, you kind of like emotionally prepare yourself for moments like this without ever actually being ready.
Mhm.
So yeah, this was one of those where, you know, it's become a time now, because as I'm now at the age where the people I grew up watching are starting to retire one by one, and this is
Oh,
just
you're
another
so
one,
young.
and it's like, exactly, this is like the first time that there's a wave of the people I grew up, idolizing and
Mhm.
watching and following, are now starting to either get to the end of their career or actively retiring, and this was one of the bigger ones. So yeah, it was definitely an emotional read, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's tough to like verbalize a thank you for someone that's been so vitally important to such an important to a sport that you hold so near and dear for your own
Mhm.
country. Um and like I kind of thought about, like, what am I gonna say on the show? Oh my god, and I still don't know what I'm gonna say. Like, all I could say is
Yeah.
like thank you, and for so many different reasons. So I mean,
Mhm.
there will never be, another
Yeah.
Christine Sinclair, no matter what.
No.
So um yeah, just thank you so much.
Yeah. No, I mean she's been so prolific. She is the best goal scorer of all time in soccer, and that's going to be a really really huge record for whoever comes along next to try to overcome. She's iconic. She's been a pioneer. She has obviously been very vocal about the importance of equity in sport, which is something that we are quite passionate about here at the Ball is Round as well. Um, for me, uh, she transcended, soccer, and she was able to draw attention to those important issues off the pitch, which is such a sign of a true leader. And she helped keep soccer relevant in Canada when Canada Soccer was not able to do that for themselves. Um, and she was so instrumental to all of the good things that have happened for the Canadian women's national team. So losing her, I mean, it almost feels like losing the team, you know? It's definitely going to be, I think, really emotional. I would hope that Bev Priestman, if she doesn't start the match versus Brazil, I would hope that in this window, Bev Priestman will give the public the opportunity to applaud her either coming onto or leaving the pitch, because of everything she's done in those past 23 years for Canada. She's done a lot more than I think any of us realize. And I mean, she's done it, under some difficult conditions with this federation. So yeah, she's enormous. I'll ask you, Elias, and I'll give mine as
Mhm.
well. What's your when you're gonna think back on Christine Sinclair's career, what's going to be the best memory that you have of her in the Canadian national team kit?
Yeah. So this is a weird one because you asked me this question, and the first thing that came to mind was, oddly enough, a very bittersweet moment, right? Which is the 2012 Olympics, that entire tournament, which was essentially my introduction to the women's national team, right?
Cool.
I was 14 years old, right? So I had, look, I played soccer, but I had never really, immersed myself in overseas soccer in general, right? I
Hmm.
watched the Impact. That was fun. I watched. I started to get into Barcelona, and that was like, still very rudimentary. But the Olympics came along, and the women's national team was kicking ass and taking names. And at the forefront of that was Christine Sinclair, who ended up, I think she was the leading goal scorer of the tournament too, if I'm not mistaken.
She was, yeah.
So unsurprisingly, the leading goal scorer of the tournament. And, you know, I remember, you know, sitting at home with my family watching the game against the States and all the nonsense that ended up happening with the 6 seconds and the penalty and the heartbreak. But that was the first time that I had ever properly followed the women's national team. And, you know, just the fact that she was, you know, she was there in all her glory, doing what she does best, and, you know, carrying that Canadian team to that incredible, you know, Olympic medal was kind of what cemented me loving this team and me, you know, following them and following, you know, all the players. And especially if you contrast them with the men's team that wasn't doing as great, you saw the women's team put on this incredible pedestal for the first time because they were, you know, rightfully so, doing this well. And yeah, so that's definitely going to be my most cherished Christine Sinclair until this coming Saturday when I get to see her in person for the last time. That will probably eclipse that. But for the time being, those Olympics, as disappointing as that semifinal was, is still a very cherished memory for me personally.
Yeah, no, and that's a good one for sure. And I'm sure that's one that sticks out for a lot of people. Definitely, obviously, it's incredibly memorable. Anytime a Canadian scores a hat trick against the U.S. national team, I think we're going to be a happy bunch. Yeah, build the statue. In all seriousness, though, build the statue. Regardless of that.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
That being said, I'll give mine. And I will go with. Like you know, winning a medal is obviously really good, but I'm gonna go with the 2015 World Cup opener that was obviously here in Canada. I think it took place in Edmonton, if I'm not mistaken. And Christine Sinclair scored a late penalty to win against China, and for me, like that was China. Yeah, for me that was really meaningful because, you know, she got to play a World Cup at home, you know, and knowing all the work that Christine Sinclair has done to elevate the conditions for women's players and to elevate the quality of the game, to elevate the developmental pathways, and so on and so forth. I think that was really meaningful. And so for her to be able to score in the World Cup opener at home, having Canada host the World Cup, was just like so symbolic of everything I think that she deserved for all the service she's given to this national team. So that's what I'll go with, even though that World Cup did not end on the best of notes for Canada, sadly.
That is a very great moment. That is true.
Yeah. I mean, she scored 190 goals. We have an embarrassment of choices to pick, but that's kind of one that sticks out for me. It's probably a little bit of recency helps as well, but yeah. We do have a question from Matthew as well, who asks, Vien or Sinclair as a starter in Montreal? I'm gonna say Vien. What do you say, Elias?
See, the thing is, I love a starter coming off and getting the standing ovation. I think that's the way you're supposed to do it. But again, Christine Sinclair as a super sub, Christine Sinclair has kind of embraced that role of a super sub with the national team of late. And the ovation when she lines up at midfield to come on is going to be insane. Huge.
Yeah.
So we just start them both. No.
Yeah, there we go.
There's problem solved. Yeah, I think honestly I'm happy with either or, because either way she's going to get an incredible ovation, whether she comes on or she comes off. I think that, you know, somebody coming off, especially that symbolic passing of the torch, is much more meaningful, and that's why you kind of see that to be done a bit more often. So yeah, I think that you start Sinclair, you give her an hour, and you let her, you know, do her thing, and then you give her the proper goodbye would be awesome.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I went with Vivienne just because I think, she's a local. I think
That too.
that I feel like that's something that maybe Bev Priestman is going to lean into, playing in the market that she's playing in, and especially given it's a friendly against a team they've played several times in the past year. And as well, of course, Canada does also need to make up some FIFA points because they are dropping in those rankings, unfortunately. So I could see Jan starting. She's in great form in Italy. She just scored, today. She's been scoring for fun, kind of. Not for fun, but she's definitely been scoring her fair share of goals in different competitions as well. So I'm gonna go with Vivienne starting, but like you said, I'd be fine.
There's
with
really
either.
there's no wrong answer here. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, agree. Alrighty, so I think that wraps it up for the topics that we had to discuss for this evening. Obviously, we'll be looking at Montreal's season under a microscope starting next week. So Elias, shall I turn it over to you for social media?
Let's do it.
All
Lots
right.
of questions.
I didn't do a very good job saving these, so I don't know what order they're in. Okay, fair warning.
Okay. There's no specific order, so.
Okay, good.
The chips fall where they may. Yes, this is from Doug Mayu. Who are you going to take in the playoffs? Is everyone behind Vancouver? This question from UC Radio also. Eve, are you going to be following the playoffs with Montreal eliminated? And if so, who would you like to see win?
I'll follow them to some degree. I'm not gonna move around my calendar or anything like that to watch. Especially I find with essentially all of the matches happening at the same time this year, I found it hard to follow the other teams. Just because you can't necessarily, you kind of don't have that window and you don't have as many Sunday games. Mm-hmm. So I found it hard to kind of get as into the league as a whole as I have been in previous years. But yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on what's going on. And obviously, Vancouver would be cool to see a Canadian team get some success for sure. But I'm going to say St. Louis. I'm going to say go ahead. I'm going to put my weight behind St. Louis. We have a Canadian player on that team. And as well, they just buck all those stereotypes about expansion clubs. They didn't spend their money exorbitantly or anything like that. They built a successful team in admittedly a weakened pool of Western Conference. But yeah, that's my thought. What about you, Elias?
Yeah. Well, Matthew kind of convinced me because Matthew made a very good point that if Vancouver wins the MLS Cup, CF Montreal automatically qualifies for the Champions League, because if the winner of the Voyageurs Cup also wins MLS Cup, then the finalist. I wonder
was it this year like the Canadian? No, was it this year? Because
this is the first year that
the Canadian teams have more pathways. Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was this year or next year. I don't know what year.
I wonder if if Vancouver wins both, will they pick the MLS Cup final runner-up or the Voyageurs Cup final runner-up to be that second team? If it's the Voyageurs Cup runner-up, then yes, obviously go Whitecaps. But at the same time, I don't think I'd be able to survive the banter of CF Montreal being the only Canadian team without an MLS Cup, which would which would not be fun to endure. Because again, even if they do improve next year, I don't see the MLS Cup in the future, at least in the immediate future, unless some drastic changes are made. Besides that, I'd love to see Cincinnati win. I think that they have my feelings for Luciano Costa aside, I think that they're a team that have fought and scraped and dug and struggled, and the fact that they have such a good team and they are in such an incredible run right now, seeing them go all the way would be a very nice testament to that city and that club not giving up. So
fair enough. Yeah, no, I'm not 100% sure as to how it works as to which runner up would make it if theoretically Vancouver were to qualify both ways. I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to try and look that up, though, this week because I'm curious now. So that has brought up a really good, interesting point as well. Matthew had another comment. It just kind of came up as we were transitioning topics, but I think it's worth mentioning. So Matthew also wanted to share his first memory of Christine Sinclair, which is the 2002 FIFA Under-19 Women's World Championship in Edmonton. Okay, that is a throwback. And I will be honest, I was 12 years old. I don't have memories of that one myself.
I was 4.
But I know that, okay, yes, you were a small child. Thank you. Thank you for making me feel old. I appreciate it. But yeah, that was kind of like when Christine Sinclair was, vacillating, I guess, if you will, between the senior and the youth national team setup. So I can only imagine how much she must have stuck out at that tournament, knowing the phenomenal talent that she is and always has been. We also had a comment from Patrick on this who said, if there's one thing Apple needs to change next year, it's having different start times. Yes, personally, as someone who wants to follow the league in general, yeah, I agree. Because admittedly, I usually get caught up in doing other things. And so like to sit down and rewatch a match where I already know the scoreline and stuff, I'm not as interested.
Like noon, 3 o'clock, and 7. You have like three shifts for both days. You have 6 shifts, for people, and 8 shifts really if you count the West Coast having like a 9 o'clock shift for the people out east, if you will. For the people out west, that means morning soccer, which is like, who doesn't want morning soccer? MLS soccer, at least.
Yeah.
I just think that like Patrick said, staggering the games absolutely has to be one of their top priorities next year.
Agree. And Matthew also asked the question, is the MLS playoff schedule out yet?
Yes,
the schedule is out for the first bit of it. I don't think it's out for the whole thing.
For the play-in. The play-in is on the 25th for the 2 games. And then I'm assuming that
and then like the round of 3.
I'm assuming the round of 3 starts on the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised.
No, they already announced it. Like they announced when it's going to start. And you're right. It starts on Saturday, the 28th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you're correct. So yeah, the basically the first part has been announced, but as to the subsequent sections or subsequent rounds, not yet. Alrighty, next tweet.
Yes, this is from Julien Tessier. We spent $5 million on players this year. I don't think it's about spending more. I think it's about spending a little better. Julien with a very good point. Eve, we talked about ad nauseum about what is needed in this team. Yeah. We know exactly what we would like to see brought into this team. My question to you is, where do we get these players from? Because we've seen the club have some success with inter-MLS trades and signings. We've seen, a few instances of success from overseas, but a lot of them have come from within the league. A lot of the best bang for your buck, if you will, has come from trades and signings within MLS. Do you think that they should kind of maybe reorient their scouting from, Europe and South America towards maybe more MLS geared talent?
I'm just thinking, sorry. Yeah, I really don't know, because it's been a mixed bag. Definitely, I think that international recruitment has been challenging to say the least, although Montreal doesn't tend to spend a lot in transfer fees, so it's kind of, not as bad, I guess. I think Montreal, though, if they want to establish some consistency, and, I kind of think lean into the MLS side of things, because you also then don't have as much of an adaptation period for players to get to learn the league. Which is hard. MLS is a difficult league. The travel sucks. It's long. You play through the heat of the summer in some hot places and so on and so forth. So that is an advantage from recruiting within the league. As well, of course, when you are spending money in transfer fees, you're not spending quote unquote real money. It's gam and tam, which is kind of to a degree, yeah. Like obviously it's money, but it's not the same necessarily as asking Joey Saputo to open up his wallet for you. And to answer Patrick's question, do they even have a scouting team?
Yes, they do.
Oh, okay.
They
Go
do.
ahead.
Olivier Renard
Elaborate.
has a not extensive, but he does have a comprehensive scouting network in Belgium and France and areas like that. That's where Jonathan Duvesne came from. That's where Chillon Zolfort came from. Was from clubs in Belgium. You know, he is Belgian. He played in Belgium. So did Losada, who played in Belgium. So he does have a fair amount of contacts in and
Right, but
around
that's not
there.
like a scouting team. Like that's not
Not
people who are
necessarily, not
dedicated
his
to
own
looking.
designated scouting network that I don't know about, but you know, it is clear that he does have some pretty solid connections with
Mm-hmm.
if it's maybe independent scouts there, but it's very clear that he has an ear to the ground in Belgium specifically.
Mm-hmm. Remember last year they said that like not sure Piatti was going to do something to that
Yes,
degree for the and same with Justin Mapp as well. Like
yes,
and I think Justin Mapp was meant to be like in a particularly like in a role of like collegiate type.
hmm and
So
Nacho was like more South American, Argentinian.
yes. So as to how official that is and what has come of it, I cannot answer that question. But technically, I guess they have those guys.
There are scouts associated with the club.
Right. Okay, fair enough. And
Officially,
I think,
yes.
yeah, but I think we'll just kind of scratch our heads as to what exactly that entails because it
Yeah.
kind of also seemed like they were like, oh, look, we're reintegrating former players. Be happy, fans. So I'm gonna scratch my head a little bit at that one as to, like I said, how much time they devote to that task. I guess I don't know what they do truly. I don't know if they have other jobs and so on and so forth, and I don't want to speculate. Shall we move on?
Let's. This is from Matthias Van Alst. To compare, first season under Nancy, which was a continuation of the work done under Thierry Henry, 46 points. The first season under Hernan Losada, which was half rebuild, half continuity, even if it was a struggling continuity, 41 points. So obviously, we must also compare the squad at their disposal with and without the absentees. But what do you take away from, you know, Losada and the club did draw a lot of parallels during their struggles to the struggles that Wilfried Nancy and the team had in 2021. And now to kind of further cement that comparison, they both ended up in 10th place on decision day.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make to the comparison? We talked about this a bit in terms of, you know, the way the club is perceived after both these seasons, but from a purely on paper point of view, what do you like about that comparison? What do you not like about that comparison? Obviously,
I kind of think you need to look at a little bit more than just that. Just I'm going on the internet actually here. 2021. Hold on. Okay, I'm trying to do math. 2021. Just I don't want to say something and be talking on my ass here. Okay. So there's other factors as well, right? So for example, this season Montreal finished with a minus 16 goal differential, whereas they had a plus 2 goal differential in 2021. And so for me, there's a lot more to it. Obviously, Montreal was not much better on the road in 2021 than they were in 2022, or sorry, 2023. Just ever so slightly better. But yeah, I think there's a little bit more to it than that because just like the numbers don't necessarily tell the whole story. You know, they don't for me, or at least those numbers. Just finishing on the number of points in the position.
mm-hmm.
There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember the biggest thing about Montreal that year was the fact that they had given away more points in the last 15 minutes of a game than anybody else in the league, right? So it's
Yeah.
stuff like that that kind of goes under the radar. I do think
Yeah.
that there's some comparisons that, you know, there's some
Okay.
to a degree the comparison is fair, but I think to say, you know,
I think just stop
we
it
will then
there.
become second place in the league and have our best season ever.
I don't feel
It's a
that.
bit of
I don't feel that.
stretch,
Yeah.
namely because you don't have an MVP caliber player on the team right now,
Exactly.
like Georgi Mihailovic. So,
Exactly.
uh, yeah, it's some parts of the comparison are fair in terms of maybe the struggles or the evolution or where you are in the cycle, but you have to be careful when comparing, because then you'll draw the comparisons to you will be compared to how well the team does next year with how well they did in 2022, and that might be setting yourself up for
it could be a slippery slope.
Failure.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, exactly. I agree. Like, it's an interesting talking point for sure. Yeah. And like, I know Matthias is, he's super analytical, and I'm gonna see if like he followed it up with more than that, because I feel he is someone
who. It was a very good thread, by the way.
Okay.
But that was just.
I'm gonna go read the rest of his thread
link
after.
an entire thread in social media. I just wanted that as a catalyst to this discussion.
And then we can point people to further the discussion
exactly
on Matthias's, because he's a really nice guy. I really like him.
He is, and very, very knowledgeable in what he does.
Agree. All right, next tweet.
Yes. This is from Simple Guy.
Simple Guy.
With a little bit of that pessimism that we haven't had as much of. If Piet is a starter next year for CF Montreal, we are in a lot of trouble. Yes, Piet did not have the best game, but what do you think about this statement? And what do you think about this statement?
Well, I think Piet could start for this team, but I think the team needs to play a different formation, and I think there needs to be better support. Yes. And I think Piet's role needs to remain, what we know it is. His role did expand at times under his previous coaches, but if the supporting cast isn't there and the supporting cast isn't as comfortable in their roles as other players were, I think Sam Piet needs to play that defensive midfield, that pure defensive midfield position, to kind of cover everyone's butt. That's my thought. So I think he can start, but I think the players / the structure around him need to improve.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think he is the
helps when you play with 4 at the back.
Yeah, I don't think the blame for not making playoffs rests on his shoulders whatsoever.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily what the Simple Guy was trying to allude to. I
just think he wasn't thrilled with Piet's game, but
maybe, yeah.
That's understandable, because again, you can look at him to kind of, in that first goal, he was very soft on the challenge, and that led directly to the layoff to Cucho. But I think that as a pure ball winner and recovery specialist, there isn't a better player on the team for that specifically.
Yeah.
I just think, like we said, if you have him as a designated defensive midfielder, ball winner, engine, like the anchor in the midfield, that's great. But when you have just 2 players in the entire of the center midfield,
you're asking the heck of a lot.
You're asking a bit too much of him, yeah.
Agree. All right, final tweet.
The final tweet, yes. This is from Arash Madani. As Christine Sinclair signals on her Instagram the end of her incredible run with the national team and won't suit up for Canada at the 2024 Paris Olympics, I'm told the plan is to have 2 send-off matches for Sinclair in Vancouver/Victoria in November, December, a final tribute to the GOAT.
Perfect. If this is how it should be.
Yes, if this is a national team friendly, and not maybe like a farewell tribute match, that's one thing. But if this is like a testimonial match, who would you like to see? Past rivals, past opponents, past teammates of Christine Sinclair.
I read somewhere that the speculation was that it would be Australia.
That would be great.
I like Australia.
I do think if you're going to have a testimonial for Christine Sinclair, there does have to be a certain American element to it.
I agree. No. I mean, that's like a FIFA window. November, December. It's the last window of the year, or like end of November. And so I think, I expect there would be a degree of ceremony about the matches for sure. Kind of like it was with Steph Lebe, right? I mean, and even their friendlies they did in 2022 when they were celebrating the World Cup, those were friendlies, that took place in FIFA windows. But they had that different vibe to them. And so I figure it's going to be the same sort of thing. And as well, then when, when Steph Labbe got to do her farewell out in BC as well, against Nigeria, same kind of idea for me. Yeah. And I think I think that is absolutely, she should get to play her last match in her home province 110%. So very glad. I will be very glad if that's the case. And I will say thank you, Canada Soccer, for organizing that properly.
Hopefully they can.
Indeed. Right. So I do believe that brings us to the end of our show. So thank you to everybody who listened along with us this evening and sent us some comments. It was really fun to kind of interact and see some of the conversations that spurred. So thanks so much for that. Thanks as well, of course, to anybody who's listening on audio or who's going to listen to us throughout the week. We're super grateful that you are listening to us as well. We should be back next Sunday at 7:30, and fingers crossed we will be a trio once again. Hopefully it won't be too cold at the Canadian women's national team match and we'll all be thawed out. And
I do not have a heavy Canadian jacket. I only have a Canada Soccer jacket. I only have a very light tracksuit. So hopefully, yes, it's not too cold.
Okay. Well, you have a week to get some sweaters to put under it. Okay. Or not quite a week. You'll have 6 days. Yeah. As well, just as an item, we do have a Patreon if you do wish to help support the podcast and help us grow and improve our product. That being said, our content will always remain free for folks to listen and watch along with us. And we're grateful for your support no matter what. So with that being said, I will wish all of you a wonderful week, and we will see you next Sunday for another episode of The Ball is Round.